Welcome to the debate. Before we get started, if you could take just a moment to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and like and comment, it really does help support the channel. Okay, so today we're looking at something that seems incredibly simple on the surface. We're analyzing the conceptual framework in foundational English learning materials. Specifically, how true beginners, we're talking A1, A2 level, are taught to define the 12 months and the 4 seasons.
Right, and it's designed to provide instant structure. But that's exactly where this deep intellectual tension lies. It really brings up a critical question about how universal we can, or even should, make these concepts of time when we teach a language.
Exactly. So that's our central question today. Does the pedagogical need for a simple, standardized system, saying spring is March, April, May, does that need outweigh the inherent inaccuracies and the regional limitations that a rigid model like that imposes?
Yeah, that's a tension you just can't escape in global education.
So, my position is that this standardization is not just useful, it's paramount. For beginners, I think clarity and just basic communication have to come before geographic nuance. A fixed calendar link gives them a necessary shared linguistic framework. Without it, immediate communication is almost impossible.
And I'm going to argue that prioritizing a fixed model, one that the material itself admits is geographically limited, well, that risks undermining the learner's core ability to connect the new language with their own lived reality. And that conceptual dissonance, I believe, actually slows progress down instead of speeding it up.
All right. Let's start with my argument for the necessity of this fixed structure. The source material, it identifies what it calls the most common system. So spring is March to May, summer, June through August, autumn or fall is September to November, and then winter is December through February.
Which, we should be clear, is a north-centric model for temperate regions, but it's presented as the default.
Well, it is presented as the default because structurally, it's the most efficient starting point for an A1 or A2 learner. This grouping gives them immediate, predictable language pegs. If the main goal is to let them talk about simple things like birthdays, holidays, plans, they just need a clear shared framework. We all rely on this kind of assumed linkage when we say things like, my exams are in June, or, the fiscal year ends in March.
I understand the argument for a stable timeline, yes.
But without this fixed, generalized model, the learning process becomes way too complex for a beginner. Can you imagine trying to explain global seasonal variation before the learner has even mastered basic verb conjugation? Clarity and, frankly, speed of acquisition demand a universal starting point. This system lets them practice simple, high-frequency sentences, things like March is in spring, July is in summer. That simple linguistic link is the whole point at this stage.
Okay, but I have to challenge this whole premise that simplicity justifies inaccuracy, especially at this foundational level. The material itself gives us huge caveat. Not all countries have the same seasons. So it acknowledges the global reality, but then it just pivots immediately and teaches a strict, fixed-month model as the primary truth. For anyone not living in that specific climate, that creates an immediate cognitive contradiction.
But the contradiction is just a necessary stage of learning any global language. You learn the convention first, then you learn its exceptions.
But the fundamental error, as I see it, is prioritizing a calendar definition, this idea that June is always summer, over the sensory, the meteorological reality that actually defines what a season is. The material says summer is, and I quote, hot and sunny, people go swimming. So if a learner is somewhere where June is cold and rainy, associating the word summer with the month June creates this huge barrier. It stops them from linking the language to their own verifiable experience. The connection is based on a falsehood for them.
But the description, the weather, is an adjective. It's applied to the noun, which is the season's name. We have to stabilize the noun first.
I disagree. The definition of the season has to be tied to that descriptive content, the weather, the activities, the clothes you wear. I mean, that's the real-world hook for the language. When the material has dialogues like, "we travel in July," and links it right away to summer, it just solidifies a regional bias that makes the whole fixed-month idea less useful globally.
And this brings us to a key point of disagreement, doesn't it? Should we define a season by its place on the calendar or by its activities and weather?
The material's own definitions demand a focus on reality. If it defines summer by saying, "summer is hot and sunny and people go swimming," then the very function of the word summer is tied to that physical experience. So how can we credibly say that June, July, and August are universally summer when the main defining conditions, the heat, the swimming, don't apply everywhere then? The system forces the learner to accept a definition that contradicts the very language they're also learning to describe their world.
I think you're focusing on descriptive reality, but you're overlooking the true pedagogical goal here. The goal is building fluency in English as a tool for communication, not as a reflection of local climate science. The fixed system gives them the linguistic mechanism to order time in a way that's standard for all speakers, no matter where they live. That calendar grouping is a shared reference point for talking about global events. You know, when are the Olympics? Oh, in July or August, during the standard summer period.
But even those examples prove my point. Global events like the Olympics are often scheduled around Northern Hemisphere norms. That just shows that the fixed calendar model is a cultural artifact being taught as a universal truth. If I'm talking to a friend where July is the middle of winter and I mention my summer vacation, my friend understands I mean the hottest months in my area, not necessarily July. The function of the word is contextual, not fixed to a calendar.
But to communicate efficiently, you have to teach the 12 months, then you group them in the simplest, most common way. That's what allows the conversation to even start. A learner needs a stable noun, summer, attached to a stable time frame, June, August, before they can start talking about the variable adjective, whether it's hot or cold. If we introduce all that meta-awareness about geography before they're fluent, we're just going to overwhelm them.
I'm not convinced that the fixed structure has to come before the descriptive reality. Let's talk about the pedagogical risk of pushing this most common system.
Okay? I still maintain that defining this system is the most efficient use of instructional time at this level. It allows for immediate, successful practice of descriptive language within a clear, predictable framework. The instruction is implicitly focused on linking the season name and its typical weather to the month name. It establishes a basic link that, yes, can be refined later on when the learner is more advanced.
And that's a good argument for efficiency, I'll grant you that. But what about the cognitive burden? The unlearning that has to happen later. This material is for A1, A2 learners. Their language acquisition is built on concrete, real-world experience. So if the basic structure they learn, December is winter, you need coats and scarves, directly contradicts their reality where December is 30 degrees Celsius and they're at the beach, it forces this unnecessary cognitive loop.
What kind of loop are you talking about? They're learning the conventions of the English language.
The loop is the mismatch between the word's form and its actual meaning for them. Look, English speakers often use season names as fixed temporal nouns. We say, "I'm going skiing next winter," and everyone knows that means December, January, February. But for a learner in the Southern Hemisphere, their only logical hook for the noun winter is the cold season. If they're forced to use winter to talk about December, they're either lying about their own life or they're actively translating a foreign system in their head, which defeats the entire purpose of building automatic fluency.
But your alternative, letting learners just define their own seasons right away, that requires a really advanced understanding of relative time and global climate. That's a huge thing to ask of a beginner.
Is it though? The effort we spend enforcing this fixed system might be better spent teaching learners how to define their own local seasons using the exact descriptors provided in the material. A beginner could absolutely learn to say, "My summer is in December, January, February. I go swimming in my summer." That uses the vocabulary, it uses the structures, and it's 100% accurate for them. The material already gives them the pieces. Forcing the north-centric grouping creates an unnecessary problem.
But you have to provide the model first so they can identify and use the 4 universal seasonal nouns. The personalization has to come second. Let's look at the specific examples in the material to see how this works.
I agree. The material zone examples show the system's bias and its limits. I mean, take the story of Anna. Anna loves spring. In March, the weather starts to get warm. In April, she sees many flowers. This whole story ties the language directly to a Northern Hemisphere temperate experience of those months. This specificity proves that the so-called standardized system is inherently rooted in one particular climate, and that undermines any claim it has to be universal.
I think that's a selective reading of its didactic purpose. Those stories, Anna's story, Emma's year, they aren't meant to be universal climate truths. They're meant to be models for the learner. The learner is supposed to internalize the pattern. Month 1, 2, 3 equals season X. The stories just provide functional vocabulary that's associated with one set of months to show the relationship between the descriptive words and the chronological frame.
But then you're teaching the content of a foreign climate as the default content of the language. If the goal is truly just the structure, why load it with such specific, culturally bound descriptions? Why not use more neutral examples?
Because abstract examples are much harder for a beginner to internalize. Concrete stories, even if they're geographically specific, they help with memorization and application. The integrity of that March-May framework is what allows the learner to then substitute their own context later on. When they get a prompt like, "My favorite month is blank because blank," we cannot build fluency without that common stable calendar reference point to start from. A beginner needs to know that when an English speaker says spring, they are most likely talking about the 3 months after February. That's how the conversation about time usually begins.
But if that initial understanding is immediately disproven by their own world, the framework's utility is just severely diminished. Why teach them to organize months in a way that is immediately counterintuitive and needs complex mental gymnastics to fix? If seeing colorful leaves is the genuine indicator of autumn, then the months assigned to that season should flow from that reality in the lesson, not dictate it.
We're teaching the language to communicate about the chronological system. If a learner is talking to someone in another country, they both understand that June is month 6 and that it falls in the standardized grouping of summer, even if their weather is different. That common reference point is what's paramount.
And so they're forced to spend mental energy clarifying, well, my June is actually like your December. This is the inefficiency I'm talking about. If I'm asked what I do in summer, I should describe my activities when it's hot. If the curriculum forces my summer to be June, July, and August, I now have to talk about activities that might involve wearing a jacket, which directly contradicts the material's own definition of summer. That contradiction is the price of this standardization.
It's a trade-off, and I think it's one we have to accept at the foundational level. The difficulty of trying to teach multiple regional models to A1 students all at once it's unsustainable. We have to prioritize a single consistent model to build a base from.
Or perhaps the middle ground is to teach the months and the descriptive words separately. Enforce the 4 seasonal nouns, spring, summer, autumn, winter, but then let the learner assign their own local grouping, instead of forcing a most common system that misrepresents the globe.
But that is what the guided speaking practice encourages them to do, to personalize the structure they've learned. You have to provide the model first to enable the linguistic structure.
We just have to make sure the model doesn't actively misdirect them.
This discussion, I think, reinforces my initial position. The standardized grouping of the 12 months into 4 seasons, as it's conventionally prescribed, it provides necessary conceptual scaffolding for a beginner. While yes, geographic variation is real, this fixed framework is vital for achieving initial fluency and enabling clear communication about time and events worldwide.
And while I do acknowledge the need for structure, the core intellectual challenge for me is still there. We're teaching abstract ideas of time that are defined by dynamic physical reality, heat, flowers, falling leaves, using a completely static, fixed calendar. We have to be aware that prioritizing that calendar risks misrepresenting the descriptive reality a learner experiences every single day, especially when the material itself admits that variation is the global norm, not the exception.
We have certainly explored the tension between pedagogical simplicity and global accuracy in defining the calendar year. It just goes to show how even the most basic linguistic structures carry significant cultural and geographical weight.
Indeed. It forces us to ask what reality we're actually describing when we use a simple word like summer to a global audience of beginners.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like, and leave a comment to support the channel.